You are listening to the IoT For All Media Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All Podcast, the number one publication and resource for the Internet of Things. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon. If you are watching this on YouTube, we truly appreciate it if you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you're listening to this on a podcast directory somewhere, please subscribe so you get the latest episodes as soon as they are out. All right, on today's episode, we have Sanjay Sharma, the CEO of Roambee. Roambee is a company I'm sure many of you heard of before. They offer better supply chain visibility on demand for on-time, in full, in-condition delivery of shipments and assets anywhere in the world. Very impressive company. We talk a lot about on this episode the food supply chain, how IoT plays a role in the space, biggest risks the industry is facing. What does it mean to really monitor your supply chain? Biggest challenges they're seeing in the space. How data is helping these businesses, especially with things like regulatory compliance, reducing insurance costs, other operating costs, things along those lines, and kind of how you can get started building end-to-end supply chain visibility for your business. So all in all, fantastic conversation. I think you'll get a lot of value out of it. But before we get into it, any of you out there are looking to enter the fast-growing and profitable IoT market, but don't know where to start? Check out our sponsor, Leverage. Leverage's IoT solutions development platform provides everything you need to create turnkey IoT products that you can white label and resell under your own brand. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All Podcast. Welcome, Sanjay, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited about this conversation. I wanted to kick it off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself to our audience.
My name is Sanjay Sharma. I'm the CEO of Roambee Corporation. We are based here headquartered here in Santa Clara, California, with offices, in 9 countries, and we basically deliver, supply chain visibility as a service for our enterprises.
Fantastic. Can you dive a little bit more into the company side of things? And what I'm kind of looking for is just to hear a little bit more. You talked about supply chain as a focus. Are there any particular use cases that you're comfortable sharing just to kind of give some perspective as to the full scale of what you provide for the industry?
Yes, absolutely. So our mission starts when goods get packed into a container, a pallet, or even a carton or a package, and our customers ask of us to basically monitor these shipments as they move from origin to destination.
Sure.
And while it's moving, they want us to deliver at the very basics of where these shipments are and what is the condition of the shipments.
Okay.
But very, very soon, they want to basically have us take this information and extrapolate into predictions. So knowing where my shipment is, knowing what those conditions are, can you predict things in my supply chain? For example, can you predict the spoilage risk? Can you predict a damage risk? Can you predict a tamper risk? Can you predict quality risk? And many other risk profiles, right? And that's what our customers use us for. We basically play in markets like the pharmaceuticals and the life sciences, the food and beverages.
Okay.
We have customers in the electronic space. We have customers in chemical industry. We have customers in the logistics space that basically use our service to be more efficient and more transparent. So that's a little bit of a profile on what we do.
Fantastic. So when people talk about supply chain, especially as it relates to IoT, we're always thinking about how we can better monitor the entire supply chain, different pieces of it potentially, to get that information that really matters. Can you talk us through, kind of at a high level, how that has kind of been done in the past and kind of what's really different about the capabilities these days and kind of why it's better?
Yeah. So if you look back 10 years, right, the way it was done was a lot of calling, a lot of emailing. It graduated from those high touch people to people or inbox to inbox communication to things like EDI. So companies started basically bringing EDI messages into the play and exchanging those messages in a certain format that anybody could understand. And then they graduated into basically tracking the trucks, right? So the fact that I know where the truck is, I can claim the shipments inside the truck is, I have knowledge of where those locations are. But trucks only form one part of the supply chain, right? When you look at raw materials, when you look at finished goods moving globally, it's the multimodal transportation play that comes into design here. And most of our customers, today have some or the other point solution. Now, with the whole revamping of the supply chain, or many call it as the digital transformation of the supply chain, it is critically important for enterprises to react to any changes. And you can only react if you know what's happening around your goods and asset in real time.
Sure.
And once you know how to react, can you make that reaction repeatable so that when the next time there is a Swiss Canal piece happens, I know what are the 5 things that needs to be done within my supply chain to be, as agile as possible.
Gotcha. How has the kind of evolution of technology in the IoT space helped contribute to kind of these advances? And one of the areas I'd be curious to kind of get your thoughts on is the connectivity side. So as connectivity has changed and grown, it's enabled more capabilities to get visibility, even not just more accurately, but just kind of on a regular basis as supply chains change, environments change, different kinds of areas that they're going through. How has that really played a role in overall enhancements to the supply chain and the visibility companies are now able to have?
Very good question. So I think the entire IoT industry has been developed or accelerated its formation and its maturity based on the tailwinds of various hardware and connectivity players. What I mean by that is the chips and the modules and everything that goes into building a tracker has become cheaper and much better, with much better and powerful compute power.
Right.
And the second piece is basically the connectivity has been diversified. So not just GPS, but also basically looking at cellular connectivity, Wi-Fi connectivity, Bluetooth connectivity. A lot of these connectivities are now in the hands of the consumers.
Hmm.
And taking advantage of that existing network, that's number one. And then the cost of these two components, big components, right? The cost of the hardware and the cost of the connectivity coming down makes it very relevant to deploy these technologies in use cases within the supply chain.
Right.
And we are seeing a lot of that from transitioning from a 2G, 3G network to a 5G network, transitioning from a 5G to there are talks about, how LoRa networks come into play, talks about how Bluetooth or Wi-Fi mesh networking comes into play.
Right.
So can connectivity be ubiquitous, that in a way that basically we can track, things that are indoors, outdoors, or in transit? And to do that globally is used to be a rocket science, in the past, but not anymore, because of the diversity and the expanse of this network that is deployed globally.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's been very interesting to kind of monitor the progression of the technologies in the space and how they play a role in not just supply chain, but all different use cases and what it enables. I did want to ask, though, you mentioned earlier when you're kind of running through different things that, or different kinds of visibility that you kind of get into on the supply chain and different types of questions you're able to now answer with the data. One of the areas that I haven't really had the opportunity to talk to many people about, but I've always been kind of curious, is around the food supply chain side of things. So, can you just from your experience talk about how these technologies that we're talking about in IoT in general is really playing a role in the food supply chain, and also I guess maybe pair that with the biggest risks that the industry either has been or is currently facing, and how we're able to kind of help improve the food supply chain in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you look back at some of the vision statements coming from the from the FDA and other industry experts, farm to fork has been sort of the golden vision statement out there. It's been pursued for the last 20 years. We had RFID play a little bit of a role in there, but all of these technologies in the past had very limitations. Now, if you break down the food supply chain, the biggest problem is in the distribution of raw material, or I would say fresh produce and packaged goods. And when you break it down even further, one is basically, can you comply? So from point A to point B, when I'm delivering, chocolate products or ice cream products, can I basically make sure that, it doesn't get spoiled during the journey, which means there is a cold chain monitoring compliance scenario in play. And once I deliver, can it basically last for a little bit longer time, right? So that's sort of the one piece. The second piece is basically fresh produce when, once it's off the farm, getting into, the grocery stores on their shelf in the fastest amount of time with the maximum amount of freshness and quality that can be basically consumed by many of us,
Right.
is another challenge. Now, these two challenges drive down to two pieces of technology. One is packaging technology. Can I basically, given that I'm going to move mangoes or I'm going to move avocados from point A to point B, and the temperature on a Wednesday is 70 degrees compared to yesterday, it was 80 degrees. What kind of packaging material that I need to use, and how many, for example, ice packs I need to put in that packaging so that it can last the journey of the shipment. That's sort of where predictive analytics, historical data comes into play so that I can tell my customers, if you're moving this product from California to Guadalajara or vice versa, this is the packaging material you got to use. These many ice packs need to be there to maintain the freshness and etc. So that's sort of one piece. The second piece is when you are delivering finished products, whether it's beverages, chocolates, or ice creams, compliance is very key, right? So when you move the products into the last mile, everything matters. How long you've kept the door of the truck open while you're taking the product out of the truck and moving into the facility or the store, and what is that impact of the door opening on the temperature, and how does temperature impact the life of of these products in the truck. So it's very non-trivial. While we all can say that I know what the temperature inside the truck is, but when you add all of this together, it has a compounding effect on the spoilage or the life of the product. And that's sort of how I see the food supply chain taking advantage of technologies that provide real-time monitoring of temperature, humidity, where it is, and then translating that into spoilage risk, translating that into transporter performance, translating that into the routes that one has to take based on the quality of routes, and many other things.
You mentioned something a second ago about compliance, and I'm curious to understand how this access to new data helps businesses meet compliance regulations. Does it, and what other benefits there are accessing this data? Like, does it affect insurance? Does it affect, obviously, to some degree, operating costs, things like that? But could you talk a little bit about how that new data that's able to be collected and understood, analyzed, is helping with those kinds of areas, or maybe other areas we're not thinking about, just at the top of our conversation?
Yeah. I mean, the old way of doing things was, put a data logger in these shipments, and data loggers is nothing but, a temperature recorder. You turn it on, you drop it in a shipment, it keeps recording, and when the shipment reaches a destination, you take this recorder off and stick it into a computer and see what those temperatures were. So it was not real time, it was not actionable, it was a verification kind of a technology.
Okay.
But now with real time, every 5 minutes, I can basically tell if the temperature is up or down a given threshold of a customer shipment. And that has huge impact, right? One, basically be able to tell if the shipment is going to be delivered in good quality
Right.
at its destination. The second piece is also be able to predict if there is a spoilage risk and have an insurance premium of it. All of this audit trail that leads to a spoilage, which is maybe beyond the control of a customer. Maybe there is a traffic jam. Maybe there is some global risk that basically push the product to be at a port for more than 7 days or whatever that is. You now have a verifiable audit trail of how the transportation and various players in the transportation performed, and you can put this all together to basically claim an insurance
Gotcha.
on your products, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've seen in other industries how data, access to basically new data that wasn't able to be collected before is influencing things like that. So I was just kind of curious how it plays in a role in the supply chain, which makes total sense with all the different moving pieces. But when it comes to that, what is the kind of balance or the trade off between that access to data, but also the security side of it? Because I'm sure that's a very important thing people are looking into considering, kind of that data security mixed with data sharing and trying to find that kind of happy middle ground there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that many enterprises overlook when they're defining their digital transformation strategy for supply chain is, unlike many other data streams in other use cases,
Yep.
in specifically in supply chain, data has an expiry date. So, for
Sure.
example, if my temperature is 4 degrees in Santa Clara at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, um, you can only act on that data for the next 15-20 minutes. After that, this data is useless
Okay.
from an actionability perspective.
Right.
But that data becomes very important to understand the patterns and trends when it is collectively used, looking at data in Santa Clara on a Wednesday for the past 25 Wednesdays. Okay. So where the guidance to our customers are basically, when it comes to data expiry and actionability, put that data in the fingertips of your workers so they can take action very quickly. But when it comes to looking at trending and patterns, make sure the data is secured, data is encrypted, data is only accessible to the few that are basically looking at, taking that data and making it more efficient.
Right.
So I feel there is a dual role here. Data for transparency, of course, needs to be in the hands of many that basically can take action. And then data for efficiency need to be secured and used, in a manner that basically complies with corporate governance.
Totally makes a lot of sense there. I did want to kind of pivot here for a second. And we talked about security. We talked about kind of access to this new data. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing in the supply chain space that we may not be thinking about? I mean, we've talked in the past about chip shortages, we've talked about other different elements similar to that, but like the different technologies maybe potentially not being able to fit with particular use cases. But are there any other challenges that maybe we're not thinking about that you witness or see that should be a focus as we continue to kind of progress and grow as an industry?
I think one that we are working on, and it's again one of those non-trivial problem statements, is network propagation, right? So, for example, going back to the famous Suez Canal example, if my container is on a ship that's stuck in Suez Canal, how does that impact my own network that goes not just within my ecosystem, but also propagates to my suppliers, my customers, right? So, can I predict the fact that a shipment of coffee filters is sitting at the Suez Canal for last 15 days? What is the impact of that on the pricing of coffee filters 3, 4, 5 months down the road?
Gotcha.
And I think it's a subject that has been not studied very well, because a lot of companies, including us, are solving the real light up the supply chain, identify the glitches kind of a problem. But I think once the glitches are identified, what is the impact, at the nth level of
Right.
customer base or supplier base is something that needs to be picked up, and it's going to be a very hot topic given where we are
Mm.
from a global macroeconomics perspective.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. And it's very interesting to kind of just hear, as each guest that I have on here, I kind of almost ask everyone a similar question about the challenges that we're going to see, and it's always interesting to kind of hear the perspective from the different industry focuses and the different areas of IoT that you play in, and kind of understand. But there's a lot of similarities between what different areas of the space are seeing. So I'm very interested to kind of see how things continue to progress and move forward. And one of the last things I wanted to ask you today was, if you were to talk to somebody about how to go about starting their supply chain kind of IoT journey, working to build visibility into their supply chain, how would you recommend they go about it? What are some of the key things they need to be considering, all the way from when they're, the early ideation through working towards deployment? Um, and how do they really get started on that journey? And just, I'd love to hear it if you could kind of just take us through what that looks like on the supply chain side.
Yeah, I think by now, most of the strategy companies like the McKinsey and
Hmm.
everybody else has laid out, what the best practices are and what the methodology should be in starting initiative within supply chain for visibility, and how it translates into implementation. But one of the things, the do's and the don'ts, when I would recommend to an enterprise is basically starting, if you're looking at supply chain visibility and distribution, look at starting small. Look at basically not spending more time on how you will get visibility, but now that you have visibility, what would you do with it? And that's most often the hardest problem in an enterprise, because there are various ways to skin the benefits of visibility for an enterprise. Now, when
Right.
it comes to visibility, it can be sensorless, it can be
Mm,
sensor driven, it can be Roambee, it can be non-Roambee. But
okay.
what is important is, once you deploy, there is a behavior change. And the behavior chain will touch the people, the processes, and the systems. And that's most often the hardest part. You would basically get visibility initiatives off the ground very fast. But what is the impact on the people and their behavior now that they have this data in front of them? What is the impact on a process? So, if a process was taking 25 steps, now you got only 2 steps. What's the
Right.
impact of that 2-step process on your enterprise? And lastly, the systems, right? I mean, you have invested in ERP, you have invested in warehouse management, and now you brought a new stack, which is a combination of sensor, non-sensor data. How that sort of plays into this ecosystem, because you don't want to have overlapping functionality between the system that makes it very bulky and cumbersome for enterprises to act on. So these are the few things that I would encourage enterprise to look at before embarking on a project such as supply chain visibility.
Have you run into a lot of situations where a company looking to adopt and improve their supply chain visibility has been hindered by their existing infrastructure and kind of legacy systems that they have in place? Or is that something that's not as much of a concern anymore due to just the advances in the technology and what's available?
Yeah, actually, yes and no, right? I mean,
Okay.
ERPs are not getting replaced overnight,
Right.
but ERPs don't have a placeholder for real-time data, because the speed at which data gets collected and processed and the richness of that data needs to reside someplace. And there are times when we thought that subset of that data would reside into ERP, but ERP is just a planning tool, planning technology. What the industry is going towards is basically real time execution feedback platforms that allow us to basically synchronize planning with execution.
Right.
And that sort of has to coexist in an enterprise ecosystem, whether you're a vaccine manufacturer or you
Sure.
are an electronics company.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of space to monitor for sure. I think supply chain has become something that is discussed more now than it has been in a really long time. I think people never thought about vaccine supply chains, at least, publicly, until the COVID vaccines, and started to kind of understand how that process works. Chip shortages has hit a lot of industries, so supply chain on that front, and then just a general increase in prices for food and other types of things. Just there's supply chain that influences all of those, and until recently hasn't really been something that people pay much attention to, probably because just they take it for granted that things show up when it needs to show up, but it doesn't always happen that way. So I'm hoping that the advances in these technologies, the connectivity technologies, the sensors, you said you can go without sensors, and just the general visibility and data that you're able to have access to will enhance supply chain across all industries, and we all can benefit kind of as a whole.
That's right. Yeah.
So for our audience out there who wants to potentially follow up, learn more, get in touch in any capacity, what's the best way that they can do that?
Multiple forums. We are there in various events. We run awareness and educational webinars and seminars.
Okay,
and obviously,
great.
we are putting together meetups, in various cities around the world. I mean, high touch, getting awareness, going through some of our material is the right way to get started.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be sure to link up kind of the website and any type of content that's important for the audience to stay in touch and learn more. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and follow up from this conversation. So Sanjay, thanks so much for your time. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since we got it booked. Obviously, Roambee's been a company that's been a big name in the space for so long. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think our audience is going to find a ton of value out of it.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching that episode of the IoT For All podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please click the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to hit the bell notification so you get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.